Hello and welcome to another exciting webinar at Inside IIM. I'm your host, Akshay Sirsalewala. For those tuning in for the first time, let me introduce myself. I'm an IIM Kozhikode graduate. I'm currently working in the strategy and CDT division at Deloitte India. Today, we talk about everything you need to know about consulting. What do consulting firms look for in a candidate? How do you ace consulting interviews, etc. All your questions will be answered. And to answer these questions, we have a wonderful panel. Three individuals who've been there, done that, and have extremely successful careers in consulting. So let's begin. We start with Sandeep Das, who is an alumnus of IIM Bangalore. He's the global foresight lead at Mars Wrigley, ex-director at PwC, ex-Accenture, and ex-Marico. Thank you so much, Sandeep, sir. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invite.
Great. We move on to Mr. Thomas Puruwala. He's an alumnus of Melbourne Business School. He's a board member and managing partner at Arthur D. Little, probably one of the oldest consulting firms in the world. He's also an IIM faculty, ex-IIM faculty. Thank you so much, Thomas, sir, to join.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Last but not the least, we have Mr. Havish Madhvapati. He's a founder of Havish M Consulting and a receiver of the 40 Under 40 Innovators Awardee. He's also an ex-Coca-Cola, ex-Reckitt Benckiser, and he's been a part of Traverse Strategy Consultants. Thank you so much, Havish, sir, to join.
Pleasure, Akshay.
Right, so as you can see, we have a wonderful panel. Guys, if you have any questions, please post it in the comment below and we'll try to take up as many as possible. So let's get to the main topic. We see the consulting industry is growing at a compounded annual growth of 30% year on year. Nearly 5 million people work in the consulting sector across the world. And by a recent survey by Inside IIM, 23% of the MBA students voted consulting as their most preferred sector. So clearly, consulting is extremely popular. But how do you understand if it's a right fit for you? This is where experience comes in. So Sandeep, sir, my first question to you is, how will a person understand if consulting is the right fit for a person?
Thanks for the question. And Akshay, I think it's important to look at it from a very practical point of view. I'll go back to my journey. For a lot of MBA students, if they don't know what they want to do, so some MBA students come back and say, I want to be an investment banker, I want to be an entrepreneur. If you are not sure what you want to do, and at the age of 24 to 25, that's very normal, consulting often makes a lot of sense because it's an excellent finishing school. You have exposure to various industries. So if you're not sure what you want to do, then consulting often makes a lot of sense. The reality on the ground is it's not so much about a fit. It's actually led by peer pressure. Consulting has a lot of glamour in campus, whether it's the hotels, the flights, the lifestyle, and it's often the peer pressure and the glamour that makes people do it.
Great, great. Thank you so much for that, Sandeep, sir. So moving on to the next question, and this is particularly important for all the MBA aspirants who are viewing this. Now, what do consulting firms actually look for in a candidate while shortlisting their CVs? And especially for people who are freshers or who have only 1 to 2 years work experience, we want to understand how important are past academic scores, especially while shortlisting. Thomas, sir, if you could please answer that.
Good. Thank you very much. Yeah. So as all of you can easily imagine, the number of students that are applying for consulting is maybe 100 or even 100 times or 200 times the number of candidates that we can absorb, right? And hence, as a shortlisting mechanism, we have to definitely apply some criteria, and hence we will definitely look at academics, right? Because, and I'm not saying that academically the best student is the most suitable candidate for consulting. I cannot even prove that with experience, right? but at least being in the top is very good, at least in the top 10% or something like that. But I have not, once you have been able to come to the top 10%, then trying to differentiate between the first student, second student, the 10th percentile student and all of that, I don't think there is significant difference, but you have to be at least at the top 10%, because otherwise I think that candidate, the fact that he was not able to come to the top 10%, it may not be suitable for consulting as an initial criteria, right? The second very interesting input, which I find that many candidates may not even think about it this way, is that they think that experience is very important. And maybe some of my other panelists may, I don't know what are the views of other panelists on the discussion today, but at least from my perspective or from Arthur D. Little perspective, what we are looking for are people, whatever you did, you should have been good in that. It doesn't matter what you have done. Because when we are hiring from an MBA school, the number of years of experience that you may have, especially from the IIMs, are averaging around 0 to 2 years experience, right? It is not like other MBA schools in which maybe the 1 year MBA course in which people may have 5, 6, 8, 10 years of experience, or 4 to 5 years of experience, right? And when you have that many years of experience, then the logic may change. But when you have a lesser experience, the point is not whether you have done IT or whether you have done marketing or whether you have done HR or operations, because what we are not hiring you is we are not hiring you for the experience you have in IT or HR or process, because 1 year or 2 year experience is not what you need to do a good management consulting in any field. But the question is that whatever you have done, were you very good in that? And the fact that somebody from an engineering or an economics or a literature background started IT and became good in IT, or started in marketing, became good in marketing, started in process redesign and became good in process redesign, he became good in something that he was not good at, he was fresh. So the same person will be suitable to pick up consulting and we become good in consulting, right? So I have a view that if somebody claims that I am good in marketing and hence I should be considered for marketing and consulting, and their experience is less than 2 years, for me at least, it is not a relevant argument. The relevant argument is that whatever you have done, have you been good at it? If you have been good in what you have done, you will be going forward, you will be good at what you will be given in consulting. And I have seen that in real work also, because I have consultants who comes and say, Thomas, I want to do telco, and if you give me a telco project, I will be good. If you put me on aviation, I don't like aviation, and hence I may not be good in aviation. And then and there are some other set of consultants who says, Thomas, give me a good project, I will do it. And the person who claims that I will be good in aviation and not good in telecoms is actually not good in anything. Seriously, right? And somebody who says, Thomas, you give me whatever, I will do it. You give him anything, he will be a good consultant, right? So it is, for me, it's the wrong premise for somebody to say that if you give me this, I'm good in telco, I'm good in finance, and if you give me a finance project, I'll be a good finance consultant. And if you give me something else, I will not be good at that. Generally, that person is generally not good at sorry to put it bluntly, will not be a good consultant, right? So that is the way we look at experience. It is not the exact area that you have experience in. It is whether you have done well in it, then you are very good to be a consultant, right?
An excellent perspective, Mr. Thomas.
Can I add to that, if it's okay?
Please.
So I agree to a lot of what Thomas said, and I'll talk about how I used to shortlist candidates. I used to shortlist at IIMs, IITs, and ISB. So in terms of academics, my cut was always top 25%. And the reason we keep that cut is not because academics is a sign of your intellect, because what we understand is academics is dry and boring, and often you have to do it against your will. Right. Sometimes that is reflection of corporate reality. So against your will, can you get a job? So that's the first cut. But what I used to really look at is resumes that were balanced. I used to look at jack of all trades. So is a guy good at sports, or good at a leadership position, or good at an extracurricular activity, or good at music, or good at academic publications? So my preference would always be someone who's a jack of all trades, who's decent in academics, so top 25% of the batch, and has done either a bit of elections, bit of clubs, bit of sports, not all of them, but some of them very, very well. So that's how I used to typically shortlist resumes.
Very interesting perspectives from both Mr. Thomas and Mr. Sandeep. Firstly, if you want to get into the top consulting firms, try to be in the top 15 to 20%. It doesn't matter if you're rank 1 or rank 20, but you need to be in that group so that you get shortlisted. And secondly, it doesn't matter if you are a CA, if you did engineering, etc. You just need to be good at what you did in the past. Just focus on those two things. And I think case interviews are a reflection of that, because in a case interview you can be asked about anything, about aviation, about FS, and that's where we actually come to in the next question, which I would want to ask Mr. Havish. Now, whenever we talk about consulting interviews, there are only two things which come to our mind: case studies and guesstimates. But what are some other aspects which students should focus on to prepare for such interviews? If you could shed light on that.
Right. So you've already mentioned the two things that are very important. I think there are a lot of other software aspects that we look at. So I do a lot of recruitment on behalf of my clients for contractual employees and for other consultants working for specific time durations. I think something that is very important to me is the ability to articulate what you have done and be able to tell us how you can expand on what you have already learned and utilize it in a different sub-function. Let me give you an example. So somebody might come from a background of financial planning and analysis, but they might not necessarily have to do the same thing with the existing client, right? So we're not really looking at one-trick ponies. Like Sandeep said, we are looking for a wider assortment of skills and interest areas. I think that is something which is really, really important. The second thing that is very crucial to me is the ability for somebody to tell me how do they acquire information. I've been in consulting for about 5 years, and you know how rapidly technology changes. I mean, I'm a data analytics consultant, and for me at least, I mean, if you're not up to date, we become obsolete overnight, right? And it's not even hyperbole. I mean, that's absolute truth. One example would be the rapid rise of Power BI. Now, business intelligence has been in some form or fashion for a few decades now, right? Like I was with Reckitt way back in 2010, and we were working on IBM Cognos. But a lot of these tools were ahead of their time. We were not even sure how to utilize the most out of them. And if you look at Power BI and the fact that 97% of Fortune 500 are using it, we're looking at an adoption rate of 97% of Fortune 500 in 4 years. That's remarkable by any standards, right? And going forward, it's only going to increase exponentially. So coming back to the point that I was saying, it's very important for the candidate to be able to express how do they acquire information. For example, I'm a programmer. Now, I would not really look at somebody who tells me I remember all the codes and these are the projects I worked on, but the ability for them to say that this is how I catalog information. I know that these are the micro subject matter experts in different areas. We always talk about SMEs. I call them micro subject matter experts. So within, let's say, Power BI, somebody might be very good at data visualization. Somebody might be very good at data modeling. And if somebody is able to remember these things on the tip of their fingers and say that, you know what, these are the 15 people who I follow, and they are experts in their own small silos, that's a very good sign for me, right? Because I think curating the right information is a skill. And an analogy would be where I teach a lot of Big Fours. I spend about 1/3 of my year teaching Big Fours, and I meet these guys repeatedly. So I do a training and then I meet them after 6 months or 12 months, and they say, Havish, we have a problem, and I open their laptop, I do a Google search, and I get them the result in 5 seconds, and then they invariably say that, oh, that means you knew what you had to search for, and I tell them I've never done this earlier. And I tell them that the ability to be able to find the right answer on Google is not just an acquired skill. It is something that I have trained myself to be really, really good at, right? So I'm very proud of the way I can search for stuff on Google. And I think that is the key when it comes to candidates, the ability to be able to explain and articulate to the interviewer, how do they find information, right? What is the approach that they follow? And this is a very subjective, individual thing because everybody has a different process. Like I hate pen and paper. I know I'm a consultant. We are supposed to like pen and paper. I've been working on Excel for 15 years. I like to do everything on Excel. My to-do lists are on Excel. My life revolves around Excel files. My Excel files are aggregated within other Excel files. But that's what works for me. But being able to explain to the client in terms of why it works for me, how do I make it suitable for me, that is very, very important.
Great. So basically two major points coming out. One is the ability to research, to get the data. And then secondly, the ability to present it. These are the two major things which everyone should try to acquire. And Mr. Avish, to add on to your point about Power BI, you'll be surprised, but in my internship, my final deliverable was actually in Power BI. So in a short span of time, it's really blown up, so to say. And I think everyone knows about a consultant's love for Excel. I think we even plan our holidays on an Excel. It's not, it's actually, that's how accustomed we become to Excel. Like, moving on to Mr. Thomas, you must have taken so many interviews, over your career. What are the best resources as a beginner, especially for guesstimates and case studies? What would you suggest?
For me, the best sources for getting good at it is really the class discussions. That is my people tend to, at least what I have observed in at least some of the discussions I had in IIM classrooms, is people tend to do their own studies on case studies, their own discussions, their own evaluation. It's like mock interviews and all of that. But the best experience is that when you very seriously participate in the class discussions with your colleagues, evaluating the cases and coming up with different viewpoints, and again at the same time trying to align with your group mates, classmates, to come up with a solution in a very systematic manner. Because on your own, you will never be able to evaluate your structured communication and structured analytical skills unless you are discussing in a group. It's not possible, right? And another very quick input I wanted to give, I'm assuming that majority of them are from India, which is participating in this discussion, right?
Right.
And working in Arthur D. Little Dubai, we do have around, let us say, 22 nationalities that is working with Arthur D. Little in Dubai, right? And I can very clearly see a difference between the students that are coming in from India versus the students that are coming in from, let us say, Europe or the US. Yeah, everybody gives a lot of importance to the analytical part of it, coming up with the solutions, but we tend to be a bit more weaker on the presentation skills, right? And we want to be 100% accurate in our analysis, right? Which is not, it is a very good quality. And I'm not saying that you need to compromise on your analytical skills, depth and variety of analysis that we do. But what we need to understand in consulting is what you analyzed and what you concluded is irrelevant if you're not able to communicate that to the client. Because see, you have to understand that consulting is about analyzing something and presenting it to somebody, to a client. So let us say you did 90% analysis and you conveyed only 60% of it in a presentation, versus somebody did 70% analysis and conveyed 70%. It is debatable on which is good, because if you did 100% analysis, but your communication is quite weak and you communicated only 60%, the client has got only 60% of the value, right? They did not get what you have analyzed. What you have analyzed is irrelevant for the client if you did not present it and the client did not understand that, right? So the live discussions in classrooms, evaluating cases, understanding whether people are convinced with your logic. If they are not convinced, are you able to change your viewpoints and get to an aligned view in a group discussion, is by far the best experience, right? And another very important aspect is that if you look at really what is required for a consultant, I will even make a very controversial statement that it is actually in contradiction. The requirements of a consultant is a very serious contradiction, right? Because you want somebody to be extremely intelligent, right? One of the most intelligent people, but the intelligent people that at least I've worked with tend to be less of a team player. Tends to be, I cannot say 100%. It's going to be very impolite to make that statement, because there are very intelligent people, class toppers, who are also very good team players. So I will never make it as 100% statement. But the point is that when you have been best in your school, class topper, everything is, you have been told by everybody that you're very good, which means you consider yourself at a level elevated versus others, and you don't appreciate the benefit of participating in discussions because you think that you are the best. See, what is the purpose of a team? A team is you learn from each other, right? That is the philosophy of a team. Why do we work as a team? Because in a team, we always believe that everybody is contributing into a discussion. That is why we need to work as a team. As an individual, I will not come up with the best outcome. But throughout your life, if somebody has told you, you have been the best in the school, best in college, best in IIM, best in IIT, I don't need help from others. I am the best everywhere, right? So generally, there is a tendency that they are not generally not very good team players, and that will come out when you even participate in class discussions or case discussions. So for me, it is extremely important to become a real team player, not project that you're a team player. Become a real team player. Appreciate the feedback and the criticism that somebody may be giving to you when you are presenting your own cases. Never making an assumption that you are right and whoever is countering you are not right. Those things cannot be there for a consultant. And if such qualities, and majority of them are coming in with such feelings or attitudes, and I will not blame them personally, it is because of the environment by which they grew up and the feedback that they have been given, and they have been projected as very good, and somehow it got into your mind, and that continues in your career. And that is not at all a good quality of a consultant. And these are the things that we need to watch out, and doing things on your own and studying cases and evaluating cases on your own without a group discussion will never allow you to learn and appreciate and develop these capabilities, right?
Basically, two major.
Okay. Can I add to that?
Please go ahead, Sandeep.
No, I think Thomas makes some very interesting points, but I'll also add from my personal experience what I had looked at in terms of resources. So one is obviously the case books everyone does when you're in business school. Your seniors will give you a case book. What I think really helps for consulting interviews is to listen to podcasts. So pick up any of the podcasts, say Economist, Wall Street Journal, Mint in India, and just listen to that 15 minutes every day. What that will do is someone's telling you how business is evolving, how companies are thinking. And over a period of 3 to 6 months, you will intuitively start understanding why someone is doing something across industries, what is happening. So if you're looking at resources, I think podcast is an extremely important tool. The second thing which had worked very well for me is I came as a fresher. So I didn't know much about business. So I knew only about IT. So I used to read Economic Times every day. This is a very good suggestion a senior had given me. And I used to read it every day for 1 hour. What happens is the first week you don't understand head or tail of what is written in the newspaper. But over a period of time, you start getting a sense of across industries, what is happening, who is saying what. So when you walk into a consulting interview, no matter which industry is thrown at you, you must have read something about it to at least start on a clean slate. The third point I'll make is you're talking about case studies and guesstimates. So when I used to be an interviewer or a recruiter, I also know what the other guy who's coming to interview with me has read through. Right. So always I used to give the person such a case which he could not have been prepared for. So one of my legendary cases, and this is a very, very tough case I always give, I shouldn't be saying this, but I'll say it, is Shah Rukh Khan is your client. So Shah Rukh Khan comes to you and says, what should I do for the next 5 years of my life? And you'll be amazed that this is an incredibly difficult case study to solve. So if people who are listening to this, one of you should pretend to be Shah Rukh Khan, one of you should pretend to be his consultant and actually try solving this case, because everything you have learned will actually get incorporated in this.
So interesting takeaway that if ever you are getting interviewed by Sandeep sir, do prepare this case and go. There's a good chance you might actually crack it. He's given away the secret. Or to only to all the Inside IIM viewers. But a great points coming here. First, that your ability to work in teams is very, very important, because in a consulting setting, you could be working with people who are smarter than you as well, because they themselves are from IIMs, IITs, the best global B schools, etc. And secondly, focus on basic things like class discussions in class. They will help you go a long way. My next question is
just one input on the class discussion also is because at least in when I teach in IIMs MBA courses, when I look at how people evolve during class discussions is I don't know all of you who are listening to the discussion. If you look at the way you participate in class discussions, majority of them are coming into a discussion or a presentation to their classmates with the view to prove that their analysis and their conclusions are correct. And I want everybody to be convinced about my recommendations. In my view, that is a very, very wrong approach. Again, I'm making a very controversial statement. It's not that you should not be confident. You should do the best analysis, right? And if you are correct, it is very good. But the point is, what I have seen in consultants is that their ego becomes a bigger component of the client engagement, not about what is good for the client, right? So if you come up with an analysis and somebody is countering you, and even if you are proven to question your recommendations are becoming more and more solid and validated by a bigger group of people, and the client is getting more value out of the discussions versus you fulfilling your own ego of being correct, which is and that is again an attitude that you can start realizing when you get into class discussions, case discussions. People don't change their viewpoint. They keep saying that, okay, this is my viewpoint, and they keep arguing for those viewpoint, and somebody is countering it, keeps countering it. I've very rarely seen people switching sides during a discussion in a class discussion, or somebody in a presentation admitting that, okay, this is a very interesting point that I have seen. I think I did not consider this viewpoint. Maybe my view, this is a very good insight that I'm getting from my classmate, and maybe my conclusions have to be changed. These are really, really the good qualities that are required for consultants, which tends to be a bit rare from the way we conduct discussions in the classes, and at least your initial period as a consultant. Like whoever is listening, just think about what attitude do you have when you are presenting a slide, and imagine you identified a mistake on your slide while presenting. It's just for you to think. I know it's almost like we cannot interact now, but imagine your own situation in a classroom. You're presenting to around 60 students, and while presenting, you found a mistake in the slide. None of the audience caught that mistake, and you did not make it on purpose. It slipped through, but while presenting, you noticed the mistake. How many of you will proactively tell the class, I'm really sorry, I found a mistake on my slide, without somebody questioning you? I bet 99% of the people will try to avoid it and skip to the next slide, and they don't want the classmates to catch them that they made a mistake. But look at how really bad that situation is. The real situation is, you are being paid $1 million or a 7 crore rupees for a consultancy, and you are okay to get away with a mistake and give a recommendation to a client than correcting it and giving away on your ego. Can you imagine how bad we have become as human beings? But that's what we do. We make a presentation. If nobody catches a mistake, we don't proactively go and tell people that, sorry, I made a mistake, I need to correct it. And you're willing to give a wrong recommendation to a client who has paid you. You see what I'm saying? So for me, these are very, very important qualities of becoming a good consultant. You have to develop these things as a student in class discussions, in case studies, and all of that, right? And unfortunately, whatever I'm saying, these are not the qualities by which people come into. It takes some time for them to understand this, appreciate this, and change. But they are very smart. So the moment they understand it, they change, because they're very intelligent people. And then you get some inputs, you are very capable of quickly correcting yourself. So that is a good thing about the students coming in, because they once they appreciate these things, they are able to adapt to this. But that is not how majority of them are trained, and that is how they come into consulting, unfortunately.
Great point, Thomas. Basically, you need to be able to step back if you know that you are wrong. But actually, one interesting question by one of our audience members, Priyanka Dave, she has suggested that if at all we go back in front of client, would that not question the validity of the judgment of your judgment, basically?
So Akshay, sorry.
Please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can start with that. See, the way it works in consulting is you don't go to the CEO straight away with a first cut of analysis. You go through levels of people. You'll have someone who's a project lead, you'll have a marketing head, then it goes to the CEO. So any reservations which are valid, if you think a reservation is valid, is often incorporated before it reaches the highest levels. So that's how it practically goes. So you never go to the board and first time someone is saying it rarely happens. So major errors like this, generally because of the governance that is set up, are avoided.
Okay.
Just on that question, please. So I said before we came live that I'm going to be quite blunt in this discussion because my intention is to share my views. And I'm not saying my views are right or wrong. It is for people to, we are all very smart people. You can decide whether it is good or wrong. I'm telling you my viewpoints. Look at the question itself. Can you repeat the question? Just repeat the question. I want to convey a message from the structure of the question itself.
Basically, the question was, if I'm changing my analysis or recommendation based on the suggestion by the client, would that not question the validity of my judgment?
Correct. So look at what is important for the person. The person is still given importance for my correctness, my validity, my judgment versus what is right. I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. You see how you're thinking. So we are already thinking, I made a mistake, but if I convey that to the client, I will lose credibility. For God's sake, somebody has given you bloody crores of rupees to do consulting. Give the right output to the client. Why is your credibility more important than the client who's paying you? But that the question is right, because 90% of the people behave like that, which is fundamentally wrong. We put consultants in the center of the whole picture. We think that we are the center of the whole thing. No, it is the client. It is the client. We are trying to help a client. We are trying to give them recommendations. They have to correct some situation. You are just facilitating. You are not the center of the whole action. The problem with consulting is we are trained to be the center of everything. We are more important than the client. Our ego, our validity, our correctness is more important than what is good for the client, what is the recommendation, whether the client is going to get value out of it. No. You see where I'm coming from. So even the structure of the question is indicating how we are thinking, which is already wrong, unfortunately. But by the way, the criteria ensure that you bring in intelligent people and you don't make a lot of mistakes. If you make a lot of mistakes, that's much more fundamental issue. The person should not have been in consulting, right? But once in a while, making a mistake is absolutely fine, right? Absolutely, it is fine. Absolutely fine to people to make mistakes. It just says that you're a human, right? It's impossible to argue that you never make mistakes. And the client is also very, very knowledgeable. In my view, the client tends to be more knowledgeable on the topic than you, but you are coming with a lot more research background, best practices across geographies, across sectors. But generally, the client is more knowledgeable than you. And he will be able to always pinpoint one or two inputs to you to update or make your recommendations much better, right? And you should be thankful for that than feeling worried about it.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's a collaborative effort. So you will learn something from the client will learn something from you. Exactly. I hope that answered your question, Priyanka. We've not seen Mr. Havish speak for a long time, so let's direct the next question to him. I think you are the best person to answer this. What is the difference between working in, let's say, a boutique consulting firm as compared to working for large corporates or large consulting firms like MBB or the Big Four? What do you think is the difference?
Right. So nothing and everything. Right. So having started a boutique firm, it was going through hell. Right. It's very difficult to get an entry, and I think everybody shares the same journey. Being an entrepreneur in consulting, it's very, very difficult due to very tangible factors. Right. The fact that clients already have an association with the consulting firms, they have worked on several projects. There is an understanding. There is a relationship. It takes time to build that level of credibility, right? I think the decision is not taken purely on the merit of my capability and my analytics repertoire of skills. There are several other factors that come into play, right? So that was one of my initial learnings, to understand that I can't ride on the merit of my ability to work on Excel or to create a model. I mean, that's only one part of the entire spectrum of services that I have to provide. So it took a while. But I was very fortunate because I was working with certain firms where I was stationed there for four to 5 days a week. And then there were guys from BCG and EY who used to, we all had a room, right, where we used to sit. And I used to be like that fly on the wall, very quiet and not helping. But I used to help them a lot with their Excel problems, right? That's my core area of expertise. And there was a lot of learning. And I think it happened very organically for me. I'm not sure if other entrepreneurs and independent consultants have had the same story to share, but for me, it happened very organically. For me, I never intended to be a consultant, right? I mean, for me, I was an analyst, right? I was a data analytics guy. For me, I work best with an Excel file. I don't like client interface. I tell people, tell me the problem as a business requirement document or a function requirement document. Give me a checklist. I will solve it and send it back to you, right? But then I think it was a natural evolution because since I was taking a little bit of effort to be a part of strategic conversations, I was not merely handling the models, right? I was also becoming a part of larger conversations around data. And then clients used to feel that who better than me because I work with data in and out. And remember, I'm a data analytics consultant. So
Right.
I think management consulting probably might have a different flavor. But for data analytics consulting, I think what worked in my favor was the fact that I am a data analyst who also does consulting. It's not a niche, but it's definitely a intersection which is probably not very large, right? Um, I think the other part of the journey was that you have to train yourself at understanding what are your areas of expertise, right? So I think in being able to say no to the client is super important. And clients used to be very surprised when I used to tell them that I don't think I can do this for you, or I think that I need to get the right subject matter expert. You
Right.
can't be a yes man. You can't say yes to everything. But that is the point of difference between a boutique firm and being from one of the larger firms.
Right.
Larger firms have that bandwidth, right? Larger firms have that access. They have that bench strength. So they're never going to say no to anything because they know they have the resources and they will produce people as and when required. I think as a boutique firm, you have to be more cognizant of your limitations. I think that's very important. And another point I would like to make is the fact that you don't always want to do new stuff. As a consultant, I think we all want to do new things, right? Especially entrepreneurs who want to get into consulting. They want to change the world. We want to
Right.
completely flip over the client processes and we say that everything is bad and we want to change the entire thing. And the truth is that 90% of the work that happens is routine. I think Sandeep mentioned that in the beginning, something on the lines of, how it's the standard routine work that happens most of the time. So I think it's the boring thing that you have to get used to doing and you have to excel at it, right? So I was pursuing my PhD, which I dropped out of. I'm one of the rare cases who's a PhD dropout after spending 4 years and doing 80% because I wanted to start my firm. So I took that leap of faith and I left my PhD. But when I met my PhD scholar for the first time, I was pursuing my PhD in digital marketing, and I had some crazy ideas. I wanted to change the algorithms, and I wanted to go to Google and tell them what they should be doing. And my guide said that what, every PhD scholar goes through that phase where we feel that we want to do something new, and the truth is that 1 in 10,000 thesis is actually something new. It's nothing new that you're doing, and the moment you accept that fact, I think you become a better scholar, and in our case, you become a better consultant, right? So you have to work with the client. I think we are very narcissistic. Thomas mentioned that point. I think we're all trying to say yes to everything. And as a data analytics consultant, when I create a dashboard, when I look at it, I'm almost trying to make myself happy with the dashboard. It's not about me, it's about the client. I don't want to use the colors and I don't want to present the KPIs and keep the order of the flow to please myself. I want to please the client, isn't it?
Right.
But I think this naturally happens to everybody, where all data analysts and data scientists, in a way, are narcissistic. We want to pick up a complex model. I will not pick up a linear regression. I will use a k-means or a decision tree. Why? Because we feel more proud that we have handled a complex model, even though it wasn't required, right? And the client doesn't care about it. Why? Because linear regression doesn't sound fancy, right? Like you don't want to go to a client and say that I created a y equal to mx plus b for you. You want to make it sound fancy. You want to say I used a classifier. You want to say I used a neural network. And I think at some point you have to understand that who are you working for? Like Thomas said, you're working for the client. The world does not revolve around you. And I think being an independent consultant is even worse because, and whoever is aspiring to be an independent consultant, I think the biggest challenge you have is the lack of a peer group support. When you have access to seniors, people who have already been through
Right.
that journey, you have a sounding board. I think being independent, the problem is that you have to seek information, you have to seek mentorship, right? And when you stay in your own shell, you don't know what you don't know. For me, because I work with a lot of CXOs, I love to speak to them and I keep on poking them and making sure that I absorb as much as possible. But I think that's a very important challenge that everybody has to keep in mind. Whoever is aspiring to be an independent consultant, the biggest challenge being the fact that like I started fairly early. I came into consulting at 30, and I was not from a consulting background. I was in FMCG, I was in academics for a couple of years, and then I was in marketing research. And I realized that there's so much I don't know, and I don't even know what I don't know. But I took that up as a challenge, and I started to work on that. One more thing I would like to mention, this is actually an answer to the previous question you had asked about how to prepare. Micro-credentialism is very important. I speak to CHROs from different companies, and everybody talks about how giving access to Udemy and Coursera in organizations is old now. There was a time 3 years back where an organization would be very proud of the fact that, see, we have given everybody access to Udemy. And believe you me, 90% of the completion rates are where people put it on auto video play and they just say that, what, we have completed the course. It's a loss for everybody, right? Nobody is winning from it. And micro credentials are very important. So a lot of students ask me, should I pursue online courses? Now, my short answer is absolutely. Never leave the opportunity. In the last 6 months, I have the exact count. In the last 6 months, I have done 118 courses on LinkedIn Learning. But you know what? I haven't completed all of them. This is a very important point. The problem with consultants and all the top creme de la creme of B schools is that we want to achieve perfection. And I think perfection is what will kill you. The moment you say that I have invested money and time and effort into a course, and I think even if I don't find value in it, I should complete it, you're making a mockery of the entire thing, right? Like you don't go for dinner and the food is bad and you say, what, I've paid for it, so let me at least eat it. It just doesn't make sense, right? I can give you multiple instances where I purchased courses, spend a few $100s, and I feel, what, I don't think this is the right fit for me, and I just quit it. It takes a lot of courage to leave behind the 20% effort that you have put. But then I look at the opportunity that I will lose because if I still continue to do that course going forward, I'm still going to lose even more precious time. So auditing courses is super important, and being able to do different courses at different paces. Like I might do a course on LinkedIn Learning, which I might do setting the speed at 2x, right? I might do a course where I might set the speed at 0.5x, and I might do a course where I skip a few lectures every now and then. I do what works for me, right? At the end of the day, you're learning. You're not really checking boxes, right? Saying that you have completed it. And I think going forward, doing these courses is going to be super, super important because organizations are going to look at micro-credentials. And the fact is that, especially if you're in technology, you have to keep on acquiring new skills, right? And that's only going to happen if you do courses. And training yourself to be good at completing these courses is a skill. A lot of us are not good at that. I must have done like 400 courses in the last 7-8 years. And I've learned from mistakes and I've really trained myself to understand what is the correct way that works for me. So I think that would be my advice to everybody, that if you want to be an independent consultant, prepare for hell. It's exceptionally difficult. Make sure that you have your support system beforehand because you're going to be in a silo, right? And you can't just ride on the merit, like I said, of your technical capability. There are many other aspects that come into play. The relationship building, the empathy, how to ask the right questions, right? Being able to handle multiple tasks at the same time. When you're an independent consultant, nobody's there to guide you and teach you these things, right? So you have to learn these things on the fly. It's hard when you're in a consulting firm. It's even harder when you are working as an independent consultant.
Guys, so for anyone who is planning to open their own consultancy firm, I think these are the tips which you should keep in mind. And please do reach out to Havish sir in case you want more information on this. Now let's go to Mr. Sandeep. And this is one question which is which I'm sure most people are interested in. Basically, as we've discussed earlier, around majority of the students which come to IIMs have 0 to 2 years work experience. Now, what kind of skills do these people need to have to land up a consulting job? And also, if you could enlighten the crowd regarding the types of domains within consulting or the types of jobs which come on campus, so that the aspirants are well aware of what they are preparing for.
Yeah, thanks a lot. First of all, I should tell members of this live session that I think Thomas would have hated me as a student. All the bad qualities he spoke about, I had all of them. I thought he was describing me at one point. So I'm sure you would have hated me. So coming to your question, so if someone is a fresher or a near fresher, 0 to 2 years, like you said, what are some of the qualities we look for? When you are a fresher or a near fresher, remember the word jack of all trades. This is something Havish referred to, that you don't need to be perfect. And this essentially comes from jack of all trades. So be in the top 25% of your ACADS. I think that is non-negotiable. Don't go lower than that. It becomes very difficult. And look at what else you can do. So be a part of student politics, be a part of a couple of student clubs. If you like sports, pick it up. If you do theater, pick it up. If you are doing projects as part of courses, convert them into thesis or articles. So you should have good ACADS, and 3 or 4 other things you should be fairly strong at. So you should be a jack of all trades. That is very, very important. And you have to understand why this matters, because when we are hiring, what do we look for? We look for skills like, can the person have a normal conversation with me? So you need to have fairly good communication skills, because you'll be talking to someone very senior. That essentially comes from your extracurriculars. Can he actually structure the problem and pursue on some reasonable logic? That comes a bit through your ACADS. Thomas spoke about classroom discussion. So that the academic strength often contributes to that. And thirdly, is the guy fun? Would I like to spend like a long flight with him? And that typically comes from a well-rounded personality. So that's why we look at people typically with these kind of criteria. On your other question, what types of consulting are there? I think there are a lot of types of consulting. So you will have typically the pure strategy consulting, which are like 3-month pieces. Can you tell me what will happen in the next 5 years? Can you tell me how do I enter this country? Can you tell me if this industry is attractive? Then you have the more execution oriented, the transformation programs, like we call. So a company will say, I am growing at 3%. Can you take it to 10%? And you'll work with them for 12 months. That's more execution-led programs. Then you will have programs around digital transformation. And that's the flavor of the day after COVID. So companies will come and say, I want to undergo large-scale tech transformation, digital transformation. Can you help? Havish spoke about analytics. That's another big flavor which is happening now. Analytics-led work. Can you look at all the data I have and all the models are changing post-COVID? Can you do something about it? You will have work related to design thinking, experience management, process redesign, cyber skills. So there's a whole different types of consulting work that is available.
Right. So guys, if you want such advice, if you want to interact with such kind of people, you should join the consulting festival, which is organized by Inside IIM, which will be live within a couple of weeks. You will be learning from consulting experts and recruiters from BCG, Arthur D. Little, KPMG, PwC, etc. You will also get a chance to work on an actual consulting project with the CXO of Hindalco. Plus, you will get one-on-one career coaching. You will get a lot of interview tips, and you will also get a lot of practice with mock interviews. So in case you want such information, please sign up for the consulting festival. That will really do you a world of good. And I'm sure many of our panelists are also going to be a part of it and will be taking lectures in the webinar. Guys, now moving back to consulting. My next question is actually for Mr. Thomas. Now, I think we have sort of answered it, but then how do candidates with core experience in, let's say, industries like manufacturing or commerce or IT, how can they transition to consulting? So let's say a person has 4 or 5 years of manufacturing experience. Can he be expected to be picked up by, let's say, an Arthur D. Little or a BCG or a McKinsey?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. See, the moment you have 4 to 5 years of experience, then you can start claiming that you have expertise in that area. And strategy consulting or management consulting is such a broad topic. You need all areas to be covered if you want to really give a good strategy recommendation. So all components are required. I cannot imagine that any strategy consulting firm that doesn't require all capabilities. So if it is marketing, if it is manufacturing, it can be IT, it can be HR, it can be process. This is all required. I'm not getting why that question is becoming, why that question is positioned as a difficult question, right? Experience, every type of experience is required in a strategy consulting engagement. You need to cover all aspects, because you cannot just operate at a strategy level. You need to understand all components related to even implementing a strategy. Even if you're not going to implement a strategy, the fact that you're going to recommend a strategy, you should know whether it is going to work. And for you to know whether a recommended strategy is going to work, whether it is implementable, you need to have an understanding of all the details. So you need to know IT, you need to know manufacturing, you need to know marketing, you need to know HR, and all of them will have a place in a strategy consulting form, in a strategy consulting engagement. Again, I will repeat one sentence I said earlier. Not almost, every capabilities are required in a consulting firm. It is just that whatever you are concentrating on, you need to be very, very good at it. That is the point. Right. It's not whether you're IT or marketing or HR or process. You should be very good in that. Otherwise, you will not get absorbed into a consulting outfit here.
Right. So basically, by whatever you do it well. Consulting is open for doctors, for engineers, for lawyers, chartered accountants, physics graduates, absolutely. Everyone.
Absolutely. Even for doctors, for lawyers, for literature students, for economists, for CAs. I think consulting firms hire all of them. Yeah.
Right. Mr. Havish, we have another question from you from one of the audience. Basically, some people are confused of when is the right time to start your own practice. So, as you clearly mentioned that in a big four or in a bigger corporate, you will get the backing of your seniors, you will be able to learn. But when you are alone, you are absolutely alone. So in such a scenario, what kind of experience will help if someone wants to start their own firm after a while?
Right. So first things first, I mentioned this earlier. I got into consulting as a natural evolution of me being a data analyst, right?
Right.
Another thing is that I never intend to have a large firm. I'm happy being an independent consultant. And, today I'm winning projects where I'm competing with a BCG and an EY and a PwC. But that said, I can't pick up large scale projects. Let's be honest, right? Because if I have to mobilize resources and freelance consultants, I can't really handle a project which is 12 months long and, has 50 people working on it or whatever, 10 people working on it. So I think what is the goal that you have in your mind? What is the vision that you have? What are you aspiring to? That is very important. So I'll try to answer that question for different levels of aspirations, right? For me, what I aspired to do was to create change in organizations. One of the big reasons, in fact, this did not come out earlier in my conversation. One of the reasons I came into consulting as an evolution of data analysis was because I was proposing to my clients that they should make the shift from Excel to Power BI. And there were two challenges there. One was a lot of hesitation and resistance because, see, the larger the organization, the more lethargic it becomes. And there are many factors for that, because there are so many people, there are silos. It's very difficult to bring everybody on board. Upskilling is a major challenge. Legacy data is, again, a big challenge, right? So there are many tangible factors for that. And I realized that it's irritating, right? Because I work with a lot with power and energy companies. And when I work with them, I realized that there is so much value that they can derive by transitioning some part of their work from Excel models to Power BI. And this is 2018 that I'm talking about, when Power BI was still very new. But I could see that if they started now, it is going to take them 12 months to reach that point. Right. But I mean, I had no backers, right? So I take a lot of pride in the fact that I kept on selling them on the idea for about 7 to 8 months. I would create dummy projects. I would keep on going and speaking to different people in the organization, try to get 2 minutes of their time and show them what is the value that I can create for them. And today, I'm so happy to say that today, it's one of India's largest power and energy companies. Today, the CEO says that I don't want anybody to give a presentation if it is not on Power BI. So I think bringing that change was something that was very, very important for me, right? And I think that's something I continue to do with my clients. For me, the bulk of work that I do is on process automation, where the client does not really have a problem, so to say. It's more about improving the efficiency of an Excel model. So very seldom do I create an entire model for them. The model is already there, whether it's an HR model or a financial model. My job is to come in, to look at the formulas, to look at the flow, and try to improve it. Because the point here is that if 50 people are spending an extra 5 minutes, 4 days a week, then it starts to add up, right? Plus, when there are so many people, that means that when you have to do a knowledge transfer to a new employee, that is going to take time. That means that there is always a higher possibility of a risk because there are more touch points. So my job usually in an organization, if I may say so, so when I speak to a CXO, the first thing they tell me is, Havish, we want to fire people. Help us with that. So I'm the guy who gets called in when the organization wants to improve efficiency because they want fewer hands to do more work more efficiently, reduce the turnaround time with fewer errors, right? And I don't take a lot of pride in the fact that I'm hired, but that I'm doing my job, right? And most of the time when I finish a project, you will see that letters are given to people. So anyway, coming back to the question, I think my journey is quite idiosyncratic. So I'm not really sure if others should be looking at my path and look at my LinkedIn profile and say, okay, this is what he did. He went from FMCG to academics and market research. It just so happened for me, right? But I think if you want to be an independent consultant, at least having a background in consulting is something I can't really comment on because I haven't been through that journey. But be very sure where you see yourself 5 years down the line, rather than telling the client that this is where we will help you be in the next 5 years. What do you aspire to be? Do you want to have a large firm? Do you want to have bigger projects that you pick up? Or are you happy making a change in an organization as an independent consultant? For me, there are days when I contemplate, should I have a larger team and, should I be picking up a slightly different set of projects? But as it stands right now, I've been doing this for a few years. I'm happy working independently. And I think this is what works for me. So I think that's a very important call that you need to take right at the onset. What is your aspiration in terms of the team size, right? I think that would really help you do a process of elimination and figure out what is it that you really don't want to do. So that might help.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Havish. The next question is actually from one of the audience members. That it is directed to Mr. Sandeep. You have been a columnist at Outlook Money. You've been a columnist at Times of India and quite a few other magazines. What was your inspiration behind writing a book, and that too with such a cool title like a millennial's guide to making it big? What was your inspiration behind it?
Yeah, thank you, Akshay, for that. So this is the book. It's titled Hacks for Life and Career: A Millennial's Guide to Making It Big. And what I think the larger trend is, every person that you will see in this decade will have a primary career and will have a secondary career. For me, it was writing. For others, it could be theater, debating, swimming, playing. It could be any of that. Writing was a place where I could direct that energy. The reason I wrote this book, Hacks for Life and Career, is as you will see some of what we were speaking in the discussion, I have interviewed close to about 100 CEOs, people I knew, CXOs, and they used to say that young business school graduates who come are not employable. There was a 95% people are not employable. And then I would speak to a lot of business school students, and they would say that what we learn in business school is crap, and what the companies train us is crap. So that was the genesis. And then I tried to map out what actually people want to learn. So from my own experience, I realized there are only 20 concepts you need to know. So how do you apply regression? Someone said about complicating regression, but how do you apply regression in the real world? How do you read financial statements? How do you manage your own personal finance? If you want to start your own firm, how do you do it on the ground? How do you make successful careers? So I built it around 62 chapters, and that's what the book is. The book is done very well. It's on some of the bestseller charts. I don't want to do too much of PR on this call, but yes, do check it out. The book is done very well. It's on the bestseller charts of Amazon. It's been featured by most leading magazines. So yes, the larger point I want to make to everybody who's listening to this is that if you want to make a career in consulting, trust me, it's a very difficult journey, because you have to understand how the system is designed. Thomas was hinting at it. You have 100 narcissistic, egocentric, egomaniac, depressed people trying to fight for the top 10 spots. This is ground reality. Right. Now, whether you are in the 10 top spots or the 90 bottom spots, you are bound to be miserable. And this is a daily life that will happen. So when you have such a miserable, and you can't leave that because they pay you well, they have good brand name, you get called on sessions like this, so you can't leave your job. So what happens is then you need an outlet, you need a separate outlet. And I think that's where an alternate career starts making a lot of sense.
Great.
Just one quick input on while it is a very difficult proposition to be a very good consultant, but that is making so many assumptions that you are very self-centered and you want to be prominent and you want to be very famous. That is why I think it starts becoming difficult. But if you flip your feeling and you genuinely are looking towards adding value to your clients, and you believe that you're genuinely bringing value to your clients, and you're very happy when your clients are getting something, and in return you are being compensated. None of us, I'm not talking about charity consulting, I'm talking about we have a career, we need to make our own income, but the income will automatically come because of the value addition you are making. So if your fundamental thinking is that you are getting happiness by somebody benefiting, getting more value because of whatever little contribution you can make, it actually becomes very easy. It becomes complicated when you are self-centric and you are trying to be very important, and your ego, you want to take care of your ego, and that is when it becomes very competitive, very complicated, and it's a very messy sector then. Because imagine you want to give importance to yourself with a group of the most important intelligent people in the world, right? It's difficult, right? How it's very difficult, right? But you change that, you say that's not the point, it's not about myself, it's about my client. It actually becomes very, very simple and easy by that.
Right. As a budding consultant, a couple of points made by Sandeep and Thomas are really scary, but I think we'll have to get over them. Right. So guys, we have actually just 2 minutes over time. I hope you don't mind if we extend this by further 10 minutes. We just are left with 2 questions. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We still have audience members coming in, joining in. So I hope we can further go on for the next 10 minutes. Right. So probably the most frequently asked question in the recent times. We all know that COVID has been here for a long time, and probably it could stay. The third wave could come. Maybe there are 4th or 5th waves as well. Who knows? Now, what are your thoughts on? And I address this to all you 3 people. What are your thoughts on consulting in the COVID world? And how can one, let's say, make a career in consulting in such times, or how can he excel and be a better consultant while probably not even interacting face to face with the client? And this is for everyone.
I can start with that. So if you see, what will change is the nature of work. So after COVID, so you will see a lot more emphasis on digital transformation. Everyone's going to the digital route. Havish spoke a lot about it. You will see a lot more work on analytics because fundamental consumer behavior might change. There's so much data. So the nature of work will change. You will see a lot of emphasis on cyber security. You will see a lot of emphasis on minimalist design, so which is design thinking. So you will see the percentage of this work will rise. Traditional strategy and traditional execution will exist. It's not that they will go away, but the percentage might slightly go down. To people who are listening to this live session, if you are in business school or planning to enter, what matters is you need to be, again, I'm saying, the jack of all trades. So when you take electives in the second year, don't focus excessively on one subject. So take electives across subjects. Some subjects which are absolutely critical, as someone who's been 15 years, is do understand behavioral economics, do understand elements of psychology, do understand elements of storytelling, do understand elements of design thinking. This is the skill set that will see you through this decade. So don't put all your eggs in one basket saying, I only want to learn advanced corporate strategies, a strategy for disaster. Do a bit of strategy, do a bit of HR, do some of the courses I spoke about. I think that's what you will be prepared for. Mentally, I think Thomas has been hinting at it a lot. Mentally, what you have to accept that what you know today might not be relevant 3 years later. And you just have to know that 3 years later, you might have to go again on a re-education drive. So you also have to understand that mentally. Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyone else, Mr. Thomas or Mr. Havish, you want to add on to this?
So I'm a fairly optimistic guy. I think consultants need to be. So I'm looking at the good side of things. So number one, I'll give you my experience of being a consultant. Your client calls you and says that there's an urgent requirement or there's an urgent conversation that needs to happen. and I have to drive 50 kilometers, cross 2 cities, and for a 5-minute meeting, right? Why? Because the client was so sure about the fact that you have to be there in person.
Right.
There's absolutely no need for us to be there in person, right? And this, this was the norm, right? And I think it just changed overnight. And there is so much acceptance of the fact that, sure, there is a little bit of pivoting in the way you administer conversations and you conduct trainings. I do about 100 trainings every year. And to be honest, it wasn't much change. We are administering all these facilitations and trainings, and there is absolutely no problem at all. From a cost factor, it's been a huge benefit. Like I used to travel 15, 20 days a month, and my traveling has come down to zero. The client is saving a lot of money. Mobilizing people into a training room used to be such a challenge. And I think that all has become much easier now. That's one. The second thing that is, and this is a slightly complex look at things. One of the big reasons organizations do not update software, so Microsoft Excel is, the world's largest programming language. 75 crore people, 750 million people in the world use it. And Brian Jones, who's the head of Microsoft, I was listening to one of his podcasts, and he put a very interesting point. He said that, look at our team. We have a 3-year cycle where we have 2007, 10, 13, 16, 19, and now 2021 Office.
Right.
He said by the time we start getting user feedback and we start implementing, do testing, user acceptance testing, the world has changed because it's another 3 years, right? Of course, now things are different because they moved to Microsoft 365. So now you have weekly updates that come in. But the point that I'm trying to make is that for an organization, making the transition from Excel to Power BI or Tableau, whatever is your data visualization tool of preference, that was very difficult because they never had the time. Every day there is work that has to happen. Who has the time to sit back, get into a meeting room and just discuss the future? Nobody does. I think all organizations had this opportunity. Last year, there was a pause. There was a pause where a lot of organizations said, number one, how can we reduce our discretionary spending? And believe you me, there were so many of these frills that were cut down.
Right.
Organizations had access to Tableau, and when they did a mapping, they realized that 90% people are not even using it, and you're paying $840 a year for that, right? That's another reason why Power BI is growing so rapidly, because of a cost factor. The entry is much cheaper. So organizations really understood that, we need to cut down on the frills, and they had that pause where business was slowing down, and they were able to make that transition, from one tool to another, handle the legacy data, do that porting. So I am very happy as a data analytics consultant because clients of mine who were not able to do it for the last 2 to 3 years managed to have that shift, in the last, from March till about September, October, because I helped a lot of organizations make that shift. I think that's something really good that came out of it. Broadly speaking, I think as a consultant, it doesn't really change much. I think you have to keep on pivoting and be nimble and keep on learning. I think Sandeep has spoken about that. We don't be a one-trick pony, keep on acquiring skills. But as an entrepreneur, I have a very different take on things. I think as an entrepreneur, you are very widely impacted, by these external black swan events that happen. And I think you have to withstand that, impact. You have to have the ability to handle that risk. It's high risk, high reward, right? It's even more so for entrepreneurs because the work that I used to do pre-March last year was mostly discretionary consulting work, doing additional trackers, customer surveys, employee surveys, feedback, creating additional models, forecasting. And, the first thing that gets cut down when money is difficult to come by, when cash flow is a problem, discretionary spending is what gets cut short, right? So I think to entrepreneurs, everybody has the same journey. I think nobody should be an entrepreneur if you are not thick-skinned, if you don't have the ability to withstand risk, and if you don't have the ability to handle high highs and low lows. I think being an entrepreneur, I'm not sure how it is for the consultants who work. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances who work with the consulting firms, but at least for me as an entrepreneur, I think handling the high highs is very important because you can't ride on that for a while. Next morning you have to get up and continue with your work, and dealing with the low lows is also super important because, I think that's the nature of being an entrepreneur.
Right. Mr. Thomas, please do share your views as well, because I think, you have had a 20+ year career. And, for majority of your life, you worked in a different environment. And currently, due to the pandemic, I think system has totally changed. So how do you think have people adapted to such a change?
One quick input, I think, with which was already mentioned by both the panelists, is that the clients are definitely accepting many more online meetings without a physical presence than they used to accept, number one. So that is a positive thing. The second positive thing is, see, in the past, when we used to bring in a lot of experts into projects, some of them used to come from US, from Sweden, from various different geographies, and then trying to find out a time for them to fly in and participate in a 2 to 3 hour discussion was a big headache. And some of them will not even come for a 2 hours meeting from a 13 hours, 14 hours flight. But now, because of the pandemic and the fact that the clients are accepting to have online meetings, the quality of people that we are able to bring in is significantly higher than what we were able to bring in the past, because we can bring in an expert for 2 hours. In the past, if you want to bring in an expert for 2 hours, he has to spend 2 to 3 days, right? He has to travel, stay in the hotel, then to freshen up for. Now, the number of experts that are participating in meetings has tremendously increased. The cost has reduced because we don't, in consulting, around half of the cost is related to travel and accommodation and all of that. So we have saved significant cost. But one important point, and the number of meetings that we are able to handle in a day is much higher. Like when you're physically in a geography, you cannot do more than 5 to 6 meetings. You can do 3 meetings in the morning and 3 meetings in the afternoon. That's the maximum you can do if you are doing physical meetings. But now we can do 8 to 10 meetings in a day, or even 12 meetings in a day, right? But one thing that we should understand is that in strategy consulting, all the discussions and understanding of the issues cannot be done over formal meetings. The dinner gatherings, the discussions over a coffee and a tea before the formal meeting, going out for a team dinner with the client and all of that was extremely important for you to convey some of the messages, right? So in the pandemic, that is not possible, but you have to somehow just bluntly tell the client that, you know, I would have wanted to have a coffee meeting with you, but let us have a gathering. And I do that a lot. And that is because maybe I have been doing consulting for 20 years face-to-face. So I actually call a client and say, we had a formal meeting. Let us have a coffee meeting at 8 o'clock in the night. So I will even ask a client of mine to take a coffee or have a dinner with me. And the client finds it very weird, but I tell the client, please have this discussion once with me, and then you will understand why this discussion is very good. And then we go through some of the very controversial recommendations we made in the formal meeting, and then we have a coffee, and we have it's a coffee over a video, or a dinner over a video, or a breakfast over a video. And it is not normal to do that, but you have to do that. And the personal touch with clients on very controversial strategic recommendations is very, very important. And even in the pandemic, you have to find ways of doing it. Otherwise, the output will not be the same that you used to get. It's not the output, it's the buy-in of the output. You will not get it the way you used to get it before the COVID situation. Yeah, but there are a lot of benefits also, by the way, as I mentioned.
Basically, what I'm getting is all the 3 people are on board that actually COVID has slightly been positive to consulting, because many frills are no longer needed. Great. So with this, we actually come to the end of the webinar. Before we formally end this, I would just like each of you to give one final message, maybe a one-liner, to all the participants of the Consulting Festival, and what they can expect in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yes, so I can go first. I think the message I want everyone to go back with is consulting is a good career option, but there are a lot of other very good career options, FMCG, e-commerce, etc. So don't make this the be-all and end-all of your life. So that's the first message I would like to give. And in terms of what you can expect, I'm one of the speakers on that. You can expect a lot of us bringing our real-world experience. And as you know, we talk to the point and we don't sugarcoat it. So you will get a very good sense of what is happening and if what you can learn and how you can proceed.
My quick, maybe 2 sentences. One sentence is, if you want to have a breadth of experience, variety of experience, consulting is by far the best. But if you want very, very deep experience, that becomes a bit questionable, right? In my view. The second important point is that you have to give a lot of importance to ethical consulting, because unfortunately, what I have seen over a period of time is again, you're self-centered and your consulting is not ethical. You're trying to least some vested interests for that, so that you get businesses. And that I hope that all of you are listening to this doesn't get into this regular mode of consulting and become very, very ethical consultants, which is becoming a bit more rare these days. Yeah.
I will speak from a data analytics consultant point of view. I think being a lifelong learner is not really something which is a choice. So you have to understand that if you are in data analytics, you will have to be a learner for your entire life. And I know that sounds exciting, but when you're working and there are deadlines and timelines to be adhered to, it gets quite difficult to, have 20 to 30 hours of reading in a week. So if that's not really something that excites you, so when I say that you have to spend 20 to 30 hours every week reading, acquiring new skills, doing the same thing, rehashing it, if it doesn't sound exciting, probably a data analytics consulting role is probably not the right fit for you.
Right. With that, we formally end this webinar. I must say I've hosted many webinars, but this has to be the most fun and, more importantly, the most frank one. I've never seen people be so honest and candid in a webinar. I want to thank all the esteemed guests, Mr. Sandeep Das, Mr. Havish Madhupati, and Mr. Thomas Kuruvilla, for taking out time on a weekday and helping so many aspirants. Like a true Marwadi, I have extracted 15 more minutes for all the audience members to see. So I'm sure Inside IIM will be happy with me because of that. But thank you so much to all the panelists as well as the audience members who came in huge numbers. And I hope that this really, really helps you understand consulting better and better your prep whenever you go for consulting interviews. Thank you so much, guys. It was great talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Akshay.